Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Vanilla Jing versus Tunguska, and the scenario is Unmasking. So this list comes courtesy of a request by channel supporter Ape of Justice, who requested a Vanilla Yuching list with a Sujan be featured in a battle report. Now, the Sujan is one of a number of pieces that, kind of like in N4, you can duo in Vanilla Yuching, not to benefit from link bonuses, couldn't in N4, kind of still can't really make many duos or even Haris teams in N5 that are compelling that benefit from link bonuses, but you can build duos and Harry's teams in Yuching in N5 that benefit just from this synergy between the models. And so we have pieces like the Sujan and the Moang NCO, and even things like the Pheasant rank Imperial Agent, who has just a ton of utility for a relatively affordable price. It's a chain of command model, so all of them are, so it's got specialist bonuses, and it's got strategic deployment with whatever you duo it with, and there's a relatively cheap profile that is like kind of fights okay and is a mine layer with mad traps. So you have all of these options in Vanilla Yuching that you can use to make duos that don't get link bonuses, but do just kind of work together well as troops. Now, in Unmasking, I would almost certainly have benefited, I think, from a duo of something like, for example, a Moang who can spend orders very effectively with NCO, but then also a specialist who can press buttons. So something like a hideout killer hacker would have been ideal to duo with the Moang, move up the field, press buttons in Unmasking, throw out pitches, assassinate enemy hackers, assassinate enemy HVTs, etc. But that was not the brief. The brief was the list has to have a Sujan, and if we're going to have a Sujan, we may as well fling it forward at absolutely high speed, which we can do thanks to the Moang's NCO and 2 orders from the Daoying Lieutenant. This means that other parts of the list have to be able to press buttons in Unmasking, so I've gone for a fairly heavy hacking focus, hacking and camouflage, which Vanilla Yuching also does really well these days. And I would say, kind of just generally, I am very optimistic about Vanilla Yuching as a faction the more I kind of dig into it and build lists with it. There was this kind of initial appraisal that I had, and I think probably other people had as well, where you went and you looked at the Guangxi profiles and you're like, well, these are trash now. Like, these are just not particularly good. 6 points for a Guangxi without Dogged and a chain rifle is no longer a particularly good rate just for an order. It's not a particularly good corner guard. It's not particularly scary. It doesn't do particularly much. And I have to pay a 13 point and half an SWC premium just to unlock it via the Celestial Guard. Am I even really putting these things in my lists anymore? And it turns out the answer is no, and that's fantastic. For a long time, Yuching in N4, where all of the heavy infantry and the vanity pieces, you could take vanity pieces which were subsidized by the Guangxi, and it kind of worked, but it was a very straight-jacketed list construction paradigm. The most you would get in terms of innovation was, well, maybe this list will have only 2 or 3 Guangxi, which is fine, and you would get some interesting things out of that, but it really wasn't, like, there were not lists that made use of how flexible Yuching's range of heavy infantry is, for example. Come N5, we are free of the tyranny of Guangxi just because they're kind of bad now, and some really good stuff at the low end has taken their place. But just on top of that, because there have been, once again, in N5, kind of sweeping points reductions for heavy infantry across the board, the top end of the faction doesn't need to be subsidized as much as it used to. And so we can just kind of fit the stuff that we want into a list. Now, there are still a few very premium pieces. Things like Hacktow, for example, are going to make an impact on your list. You can't just trivially put a Hacktow into a list, as good as they are. But if you play a list like this one, we've got some 44-point pieces, some 34-point pieces, a 47-point piece, and the list doesn't really feel in any way like it is struggling to accommodate them. And that's fantastic. So in this list we have a Moang, NCO, Red Fury, Flamin Spear, Disco Baller. Now, there are some people in the audience who will look at the Moang and say, that's a very expensive Red Fury that can't kill anything. And we will see the pros and cons of this Moang profile materialize over the course of this game. But I'm actually kind of impressed with how the Moang has transitioned into N5. Yes, the Red Fury is absolutely still kind of a low damage gun, but this profile has gained just a bunch of small advantages off what was already a piece that had strengths and weaknesses, but the strengths were very evident. And particularly relevant in terms of upgrades. Firstly, the presence of a disco baller. That's just really, really useful equipment on a model that has a decent ballistic skill. That's just good to have, kind of no matter what it is that you're doing. Secondly, obviously still linkable, etc., but it's 6-2 movement now. Now, I'm pretty sure the memory is already beginning to fade of N4, but Moang used to be 4-4 movement. Being 6-2, especially when you're duoed with something like a Sujan, really gets a piece like this around. And finally, it's picked up an AP heavy pistol, which means that yes, it's only burst 2, but if you are fighting at short range, you actually have a weapon that can deal kind of damage. If you need to just close in and gat a tag, the option kind of exists, whereas previously the Moang would just be blasting away with the Red Fury, being like, I'm damage 13, you'll fail eventually. And so these small incremental upgrades, just along with the fact that the Moang still does Moang things, it spends NCO orders really effectively, and it's just really durable for the cost. Good armor, good BTS, tons of wounds thanks to no wound incapacitation, and mimetism just makes it like way harder to put down than you'd expect. I don't think I've ever had a game where a Moang has just gone down easy, and that is useful to have. Even if all you do is put this thing in a suppressive fire somewhere, once it's delivered the Sujan, it can be worth the points. We then have our Sujan, yep, heavy shotgun +1 burst Thunderbolt. The Sujan, I think, is probably a lightly weaker piece than it used to be, but it's quite affordable. 44 points is like very manageable. It did suffer from the change in shotguns to you no longer get a template weapon, because the Sujan being so durable, thanks to the combination of all of the wounds, all of the armor, remote presence, and no wound incapacitation, used to be able to just really fork with that heavy shotgun and be like, you're going to take these hits whether you like it or not, or you're going to dodge, I'm just going to hit you. The heavy shotgun +1 burst, yep, very able weapon, but it does mean that there will be face-to-face rolls that the Sujan has to take that have to be face-to-face rolls. Overall, though, kind of a fantastic piece. Definitely good to have in one or sometimes even both lists, because it can still just do all of the Sujan things, even if climbing plus is not what it used to be. The Sujan will need to move in straight lines along ground level more often these days. So kind of do accept that its mobility is a little bit more limited. We then have the only pure duo in the list. It's a duo of Shaolin monks. Now, this is something that I wouldn't get to use a great deal in this game, but something I think might be kind of useful or important. There is a big difference to how reliable smoke grenades are if you can just get that special die onto them and make them effectively burst too. This Shaolin monk duo does what I want cheap irregulars to do, which is that it translates orders into kills with cheap models. I will, if I get the opportunity, spend like 6 or 7 regular orders on these guys, delivering them to combat, making use of smoke and stealth to get there, and then split the link, irregular orders, CC attacks, because if you can just get a Shaolin monk into close combat, it's got a very good chance of killing whatever it is that it's fighting. Now, they wouldn't do that in this game, but I have kind of high hopes for them. We then have the camouflage package. A Libertos, yep, Libertos are still good even in N5, some nerfs, totally fine. A Zensha, this is a fantastic profile. It is expensive. 34 points for this kind of piece is expensive, but it is a no wound incapacitation, shock immune, heavy infantry with a shotgun that can do classifieds, and importantly, it has that wonderful combination of a hacking device with Trinity. Good for the mission, good in general. We've then got a pair of Gudan troops. Now, these things, I think you kind of just have to, you just put these in your list. If you have access to these, put them in your lists. I have seen a variety of opinions on how much defensive focus you need in a list in N5. I've even seen some people say that I have said that you should dedicate half of your list to defenses. No, I don't think I've ever said that. If you want to, by all means, that's a playstyle that you could choose to engage with. But you do, in N5 as in N4, have to think about how your list is going to get to having your first turn and equalizing a game state if you're going second. And what I have found is usually something like maybe 3 troops whose job is just, you guys get me to turn 1. In this case, it's something like the Liberto and the 2 Gudan, for example. Those are the troops who, if stuff's going to die, it might as well be them, and they can potentially stonewall a really aggressive attack. Just spend the troop slots, and it's not even particularly expensive, right? Like, that is a total of 32 points. So about 10% of my list points-wise, obviously more than that in terms of troop slots, is just on these pieces that will get me there if they need to. Gudan are excellent. They are forward deploying, camouflage 1 use, and they can seal troops with a Zapper. And a Zapper is an electromagnetic template weapon, which is just going to do things like stop Norkais, force Norkais to start dodging, rather than actually make attacks. Norkais has to respect things like that. Tags, anything that's like, yes, you can switch on against it, it will cancel the states, but that forces your opponent to use switch on, it will consume the switch on, on, you've still got plenty of hacking, all of this kind of stuff. Just put pieces like this in your list. And the great thing about Gudan is that the worst case scenario, the absolute worst case scenario, is that they're a 12-point regular order, which is expensive but tolerable. We've then got a guided missile bot, because I could afford it, because it's relatively cheap, because there's a bunch of hackers, excellent, and a flash pulse bot. The flash pulse bot is one of only 2 pieces in this list that are kind of like pleb orders, and even then a repeater in the deployment zone is good. Combat Group 2, we have Dao Ying Lieutenant. This guy is probably going to be a lieutenant in quite a lot of Yuching armies, so if you're playing against Yuching, keep an eye out for a camouflage marker in the deployment zone. I am a little bit sad, and I'm not entirely sure it was intentional, but I feel like a bunch of models that used to be lieutenant profiles just kind of aren't anymore. And this is one of the few things that kind of gives me the irrits about N5, is I feel like they went through like historic tournament data and we looked at like just aggregated a whole bunch of data about a whole bunch of lists and went, oh yeah, people like 90% of the time took the Dao Ying Hacker Lieutenant. That's the profile that we'll transport that into N5 and remove the other lieutenant profiles. No, don't do that. The non-lieutenant profile was still an interesting addition to the game. You could use that in various different ways. If you wanted to save points, if you wanted to go really heavy on NCOs, stop that. Don't take away those options. Put the Dao Ying Lieutenant back. In a similar vein, put the Yanho Lieutenants back. I loved the Yanho Lieutenant profile, especially given I had good access to Chain of Command in Yuching. Why did you take those options away? Don't pigeonhole me into taking the Dao Ying or like one of only a couple of other options. Just put the LT option. Anyway. It is a very good lieutenant. It is in the list. It's going to do things this game. Excellent. We then have a Dokubai Hacker. Now, interesting little flex point you can put into Yuching generally. The Dokubai and the Hideout are exactly the same points cost. 0 SWC, 22 points. Both of them bring pitchers and killer hackers. The main differences are the Dokubai has access to Upgrade Spotlight, which is excellent. The Dokubai is very slightly more durable, it's got better defensive stats, higher BTS, and it has remote presence, which will matter sometimes for a piece that's got no wind incapacitation, and the Dokubai is faster. All of those are big, like, significant advantages. The Dokubai's link options are more awkward. It's easier to, for example, I can't link the Dokubai with a Moang, I can link a Hideout with a Moang. The Hideout, also better at short range, has got a lovely burst 3, ballistic skill 13 boarding shotgun, and that ballistic skill 13 is the other reason why you might take a Hideout. If you are firing pitches and they are not linked, even if they are linked, every point of ballistic skill matters. Ballistic skill 13 is materially better than ballistic skill 12. You are going to have games where you roll that 13 to hit and go, oh, I wish I'd bought a ballistic skill 13 model with a pitcher. Now, for me, the over-under is, do you have a plan to link them, and basically which model fits into the links better. In an absolute vacuum, the Dokubai is very, very slightly better, but only very slightly. So in this list, I've taken the Dokubai because it's not being linked, but if I wasn't linking a Sujan with the Moang, I would probably be linking a Hideout with the Moang. We've then got a Yanho HRMC, wonderful piece, one of the best models in the game, fight me if you disagree. Only gotten better in N5 with the addition of Immunity Armor and Warhorse, which makes it a gun that you can point at almost anything in the game and just be like, yep, this is a firepower superiority piece and it's going to work. It'll get there eventually. It's tough, it's strong, it fires just a ton of dice that are very dangerous. Come at me. Immunity Armor is really, really nice. Warhorse is very nice. Great piece. Put them in your list if you're sleeping on them. We then have just one more Shaolin Monk, irregular trooper that turns orders into kills, and a Pangalong. This is the second model that is just baggage, effectively. It's 8 points for regular order and baggage. Because I have as a pitcher in this list, but only one, and I might want to make use of it multiple times. Yep, cool, we've got baggage in the list, it's affordable. This is overall a list that I really quite like. In terms of the matchup and the scenario, it could be slightly more optimized, but for generic use, this is just really, really solid. I like this list a lot. So playing against my Yuching, we have Tunguska, played by my very good mate Aaron, whose models you will have seen in the thumbnail for this video. Aaron is one of those returning players. He played in N4, but is kind of like, lapsed out and is coming back into the game with N5, which I'm very, very glad about. And this is his take on a Tunguska list that is trying to make use of, in particular, some of their unique strengths, some of their unique models, but also just, have you noticed that Perseus is really, really good? Perseus is really, really good. So this is Aaron's list. We're running an Interventor Lieutenant and an Interventor Killer Hacker. Cool, yep, excellent hacking. Fast Panda from the KHD, great combination, just really, really good quality hacking. We then have a Motorized Bounty Hunter, Boarding Shotgun, Heavy Riot Stopper, turns irregular trooper that turns orders into kills. We then have a 4-person Hollow Man link consisting of Perseus, Breaker Rifle Profile, a Hollow Man Hacker, a Hollow Man Missile Launcher, and a Hollow Man Multi-Rifle Pitcher. Now, these are all quite judiciously chosen. This is something that Aaron and I went back and forth on, and we have both come to the conclusion that if you're running a list like this, the second regular Hacker is very, very valuable. Yes, redundancy in active turn, but more importantly, AROs. Because AROs are almost always burst 1, and hacking AROs are always burst 1, even if you just slap an extra Whip 13 hacker into the list, it makes the ARO presence of the list through the fast pandas, the pitches, etc. that you shoot out much, much more reliable. That Hollow Man is also really, really annoying to try and fight. Even though it's only Whip 14, it's got the tin bot, etc. Just a good addition to the link. The SWC weapon in this list could have been either a Spitfire or a missile launcher. The missile launcher is on my recommendation because of the broad effect that it can have on a list. Now, this is something that will take some time to learn. Aaron will do this a little bit in this game. But as a general note about Hollow Men, they're quite mobile. They're more mobile than they've ever been thanks to the ability to effectively move 12 inches in a turn, 12 inches in an order per model. This means you can move them forward, do things, move them back, and set that missile launcher up as an ARO piece, where it will be a ballistic skill 14, effective burst 2. And because Hollow Men are so durable, you can just have them pull back to wherever the clockmaker is, group 2 clockmaker, and if it goes down, you just recover it. And it takes, it tends to take a lot of orders to put a Hollow Man missile launcher down. It's tough, it's firing multiple dice back, it's got religious troops who will often stay standing, and you can literally fight with it until it goes down, because then you just repair it very, very easily and it comes back into the fight. These are old, like, Tom Bowl tactics, Tom being an excellent player from Sydney, who has traumatized me many times with this kind of play. And while Hollow Men can no longer reach full ballistic skill 16, they're pretty close at 14, and the overall impost is lower, and the capability of the team is higher. We've then got a Puppet Master Mindlayer. He's mostly there to provide counterintelligence and protect the Lieutenant. No puppets in this list. I personally really like puppets in N5, as I did in N4, just none of them here. Dan McConnelly, yep, excellent, and a GoPod. The GoPod is a bit of an experiment. I think it is probably one of the better vehicles, and it's being played in this list as a bit of like pop-up firepower / defense. It's 33 points, it can do a bunch of things, it's probably going to be fine. We won't see it do a ton this game. I think it's a serviceable vehicle. If you've got the SWC list, which in a Nomad list will be kind of rare, you absolutely can go ahead and take it. But basically none of the aerial vehicles are setting my heart on fire just yet. I think they're all kind of interesting and useful. I need to play with them a little bit. This is a fine list to include one in. We've then got a baggage bot. Yep, a Salamandra pilot. Now, yes, there's no tags in this list, so she's not technically doing anything there. She is a 10-point killer hacker. That is cheaper than most regular orders in Tunguska and is a KHD. You're going to be throwing out pitches and all of that kind of jazz. Excellent inclusion in the list. The inevitable Vertigo Zone, the inevitable Clockmaker, and then a Heckler with Jammer and Fast Panda. Now, in terms of things this list would really, really like, probably just, I would like to see if it could be fit into the list, and I have no idea how you would, a Thunderbolt armed Total Reaction bot. And I'd really like a helper bot for the Clockmaker, but again, that requires troop slots that the list doesn't necessarily have. It requires points that the list doesn't necessarily have. You need to start doing things like cutting the GoPod at that point, and the list begins to change. So, as a starting point, good asymmetric play, good overall list. Let's jump into the game and see how it performs. So, Aaron's brought his table down to my place for the game that we played on Friday, and it's a very great pleasure to play on this table again because it looks just absolutely lovely. Now, Whip 15 Lieutenant has won the willpower roll. Aaron has elected to go first. Yep, sensible in unmasking. There's a very small second player advantage in unmasking in terms of the button presses, but ultimately, first player has the first crack, like first bite of the cherry, first crack at the HVTs, etc. I have picked the right side of the table from the perspective of this shot, just because there are some slightly easier places to hide HVTs, but unmasking is typically a scenario where it can be very, very difficult to protect your targets. Because of the 16-inch deployment zones, plus the 4-inch, like the exclusion zone effect, and the HVTs all have to be inside the exclusion zone, that is just an 8-inch band across the middle of the table, which means that if you can pick a table side where you're like, oh, actually there's a really good defensible position, I can cluster 1 or 2 HVTs, then by all means pick that side, but it's going to be rare a lot of the time. Now, in my case, I've picked the table edge on the right because there is kind of this nook back here that I can kind of protect some HVTs in, but it's not going to be difficult for Aaron to put down pitches on the top of the ship board, for example, fire missiles, or even just come up the ladders on the side of the ship over and across and get those kills. In any case, for Aaron's deployment from bottom to top, we've got the the motorized bounty hunter here, with Den McConnelly hanging out behind. Den McConnelly, if he needs to, can impetuous forward safely, throw smoke and let the bounty hunter get forward. We've then got both interventors hanging out in this space, along with a clockmaker that has laid a mine. So just in the sort of like bottom corner, bottom right corner from Aaron's perspective of the table, he's just building Fort Kick-Ass to protect his interventors because he has an obvious interventor lieutenant. Moving up the table, we have the Salyut baggage bot, who will be hanging out providing an 8-inch zone of control, in which Hollowmen pitchers and armed turrets from the machinists can be renewed. The machinist is on ground level, hiding behind these crates. He would be better served this game on one of the higher level, on one of, like, say, the bridges. Prone on the bridge, he'd be perfectly safe, and that would put him in a much better position to go and recover Hollowmen from the positions that particularly the Hollowmen missile launch is likely to be ending up. This is a misplay we kind of identified only later in the game, but Aaron came to the same conclusion. The engineer is probably mispositioned in this case. In approximately the middle of Aaron's deployment zone, we then have the Hollowman team. So that's the 3 Hollowmen and Perseus ready to move forward. They've got a lot of flexibility there because they're very quick. They're going to be able to move to whatever makes the most sense in terms of the 3 buttons once Aaron has seen where my deployment is. Behind this large stack of crates, on his left side of the deployment, we have the Go Pod. Now, this is probably a misdeployment as well. It's too far forward. This is just kind of muscle memory stuff where you think, because he's using a tag to proxy it, you think about where you might put a tag, you think about being able to, like, how durable the model is, where it can guts, etc. But the aerial vehicles are fragile AF and very, very, very fast. I think the correct deployment for them most of the time is to just put them as far back in your DZ as possible, because absolute worst case scenario, one move order gets them 14 to 16 inches forward. I say 14 to 16 because I still don't have a particularly clear answer on whether a model with jump 8 and super jump goes 8 inches then 6 inches, or 8 inches and then 8 inches. I've been playing it as 8 then 6 just because if I'm wrong it means I'm not over evaluating the performance of anything. But yeah, I've seen some really vociferous comments both ways about how that is resolved, and it pretty much comes down to how you choose to interpret words like normal jump. I'm not invested enough to weigh in on that. My inclination is actually that it should be 8 inches and then 8 inches. I think that's kind of like the natural reading, question mark. But I'm choosing to play models like the GoPod as moving 8-6 just because then I won't be over assessing them. We then have the Vertigo Zond on this rooftop up here. We are going to deal with actual range issues from the Vertigo Zond. We're going to have to calculate its range. You have to be very careful in how you deploy these things now. But even if they're in a 0 range band, okay, whatever, it's still going to be hitting on 15s. So it's just hanging out there. The Heckler is prone on the rooftop, in sort of like the middle right of Aaron's deployment zone, further forward. And then we have the 3 HVTs that are scattered widely across the table. So the first one is on the boat in the top left corner, or the top left of Aaron's deployment zone. The second one is dead set in the middle of the table. This is probably the worst deployment for one of these, but I've given Aaron a table side where he doesn't have a lot of choice. And then the third one is in this nook that's actually kind of close to my deployment zone, but it is nestled quite nicely back, and Aaron will be aiming to defend it. It is the real one. For my deployment, from my left to right, we have the Shaolin Monk duo in the bottom corner of my deployment zone. These are there to kind of not exactly draw attention, but if need be, because I've seen Aaron building Fort Kick-Ass in the big corner of his deployment zone, and that's where his interventor is. And so if need be, these 2 Shaolin monks could absolutely cross the table and kill almost anything in their way with sufficient application of orders and smoke. But also, because Aaron has so heavily weighted that portion of his deployment, I want to pull my army away from that. I don't want to be near his center of strength when being attacked. And so these Shaolin monks are really all that's in this part of my deployment zone. Everything else is in my right corner, which is the top right corner of the screen as shown in this picture. We then have just a smattering of camouflage markers all sort of throughout the top right corner. That's the mix of Libertos and Gudans and Zenchas. I've deployed the Zencha standing in a position where it could be a mine but is nicely covered. So that's the Zencha here on this rooftop. The Libertos' mine is down here. The Libertos is behind the crates guarding. There are 2 HVTs behind this ship and stack of crates. I could really only fit 2 in there without turning them into missile bait. I've kind of made them into missile bait already, to be honest, because the Libertos has had to deploy next to one. The final HVT is pretty close to Aaron's Heckler, but there's not really any other places that I can put it. Apart from that, I've built my own fort Kikas in the top right corner of the table. We have as the reserve drop the Yanho, who deploys standing once I've seen all of Aaron's stuff. The Sujan is duoed with the Moang. They're close to this table edge, the sort of top table edge of the table, because I intend for them to benefit from speedballs. And so if the speedballs whiff, they'll just be able to pick them up as they walk along the table edge, because I'll just deploy the speedballs on the table edge. The Dao Ying operative control device is behind these two crates in the top right corner of the table, where he will be very safe until he runs out on the final turn. And the Docker by Cyber Combat unit, along with the second Shaolin Monk or third Shaolin Monk, are also in the Fort Kickar zone in the top right corner of the table. So that's a good, safe area. It's insulated behind multiple Gudan troops and hacking, and the Libertos and the mine, etc. I don't expect Aaron to make a really decisive punch into it, and he's probably not going to either, because that's not how his list is going to play. His list is going to play mission-oriented, hacking, asymmetric. That's what draws Aaron to Tunguska, and in his own words, one of the draws of a science fiction game is to be able to play an info war game. If he wanted to do heavy machine guns and shit, he could play a World War II game. If he wanted to do swords and shit, he could play a medieval game. So info war is what really draws him, even though he's in the middle of painting up possibly the best looking TSA army I've ever seen. In this particular case, Tunguska, it's going to be info war. Now, Aaron has noted he's going first, and this is a game where I actually like not to strip any orders. The reason is I have a bunch of irregulars in this list. I have 4, and I want to use Speedball. I do not, I just weigh up the pros and cons, and I come to the conclusion that Speedball and converting irregular orders regular later in the game is actually probably more valuable to me than taking an order away from either of his combat groups. I'm not convinced of that, but as a bit of an experiment, I just don't take any orders away from either because I know he has counterintelligence. And so, mostly as expected, with full reign of orders, Aaron's first turn is going to pretty much be doing things with InfoWar, but we do see the biker make an attack run. So starting here, using its impetuous and irregular orders, the biker is going to come up through these alleyways, move through this gap here, and engage my Shaolin Monk duo. Now, this ends up being a fairly long, like a lengthy engagement, because rather than just chain rifle him back, I elect to actually throw smoke grenades. This is because this motorized bounty hunter is armed with a riot stopper and a boarding shotgun, and so 2 dice on 13s is going to be a face-to-face roll with my smoke against his boarding shotgun. Yes, he's 2 dice on 18s, but that's not the worst face-to-face roll ever. And he can't kill me with his template, right? He's got a riot stopper rather than a chain colt, for example. And so my goal here is to waste time. Now, what this means is that Aaron actually does get to kill both of the Shaolin monks, but the Shaolin monks will eventually, once the first Shaolin monk goes down, I change to chain rifling with the second Shaolin monk. And so multiple orders later, the bounty hunter and both monks are dead. Now, this is one of those engagements I remark after the game that I think both players were happy with. From Aaron's perspective, the Shaolin monk duo was a serious threat to his fort kickass that he's building down in the bottom left corner of the table. He does not want his interventors to be threatened, for example. From my perspective, this attack run took him about half of his first combat group. And I needed him to expend those orders on something, and expending it on 12 points worth of irregular troopers is not the worst thing in the world. So both of us have made a trade here that we're happy with, that progressed the game in sort of like a necessary way for each of us. For the rest of Aaron's turn, he's going to move the Hollow Man team forward, do some stuff, and then move the Hollow Man team backwards. What is going to end up ultimately happening is that the Killer Hacker Salamander pilot, it will move up and over the ship, activate this console and reveal one of the 2 HVTs down behind these crates. It will reveal a fake one. Just as a note, my habit in unmasking, which I would kind of encourage people, if you get into analysis paralysis, just randomly, like deploy the 3 HVTs and then randomize. Just roll a d6. It is way too easy to be like, well, I'll pick this one, but if I pick this one, it'll be very predictable, so my opponent will know, so they might be able to kill it with this. So I'll pick this second one, but oh, what if they think, like, no, it's not how the game tends to be played. People will generally, they'll make some assessment of which one they think is real, but most of the time, good players in Unmasking will take kills based on what they can realistically accomplish. And I have just consistently found that if I try and get into my own head about which HVT to make the real one, it just gets messy and doesn't have much benefit. So unless there's one that's really, really obviously exposed and going to die, I just randomize. And in this case, I randomized the one that was on the far table edge. Cool. Anyway, Salamander Pilot moves up to this objective, activates it. Hollowman will move around. Perseus will throw some smoke. He's very good at throwing smoke, by the way. Because he has Ballistic Seal Attack +1 burst, he's effectively throwing smoke on 3 dice. and he lays down some smoke to allow pitches to be placed. With the button pressed and one decoy HVT revealed, pitches get thrown down behind this pile of crates here. Spotlight the HVT. Missile lands. Missile kills the HVT and my Libertos because my Libertos is perhaps a little bit unwisely positioned. So, yep, okay, another kill. That's a third irregular trooper down for Aaron in the first turn, but the Libertos, like the Shaolin monks, are acceptable casualties. Probably more annoying is the presence of the Pitcher and the Salamander pilot, both of which I will kind of have to deal with, but I'll get to deal with those in my own turn. The remainder of Aaron's turn is just spent pulling the Hollow Man team back. He does take like one face-to-face roll with the missile launcher, but it's basically inconclusive. I think he wins the roll, 2 dice on 14s to 1, but because of the Moang's immunity armor, I'm basically going to be fine against missile attacks. You know, it's not a safe face-to-face roll, but I'm not going to die from them. So at the end of Aaron's first turn, he's killed 3 irregular troopers and a HVT and pressed a button, but I'm in position to move forward and accomplish some things. Now, the biggest annoyance, as mentioned, is actually the pitcher that he's placed. We have to deal with that, and so we're going to deal with that with the Dokkaebai. Dokkaebai Cyber Combat team is just going to peek out and shoot a pitcher down to here, and then it's going to Trinity it's going to get crit, and then take a wound, and then take the face-to-face roll again, and a couple of face-to-face rolls later, it will put down the Salamander pilot and kill one of Aaron's specialists. We're then going to have the Yanhuo stand up and do Yanhuo things. It will also get crit by the Hollow Man missile launcher and take a wound, but continue the face-to-face roll, and eventually it will put the Hollow Man missile launcher all the way to unconscious. Not dead, it's really, really hard to put Hollow Man all the way to dead, but because the Clockmaker is kind of out of position, I am able to put it down and have some reasonable confidence that it will stay down for at least a fair bit of the game. The rest of the turn is spent moving the Moang and Sujan duo forward. I call down the speedball. I get a Vita Pack, which will land next to the Yanhuo. The Yanhuo will pick that up. It will never trigger because he won't take any more wounds for the rest of the game. But the Sujan will pick up Switch On, and they will just move up and around sort of in this direction, and they will eventually, what is it? Something destroys the repeater. Oh, I actually spotlight and missile the repeater because it's the cleanest way to get that particular kill. We then have the Dokkaebai continue his movement forward, press this button, reveal the HVT that's up behind the crane, the Moang and the Sujang move forward, and the Moang will put it down. That's all I can accomplish during this turn, but that's 2 kills on regular models, which is basically pretty serviceable, and I've equalized the score. I've got a decoy of my own, I've scored a kill, I flipped an objective to my position. I don't have enough orders to get the Dokkaebai to safety, so I just put it in Cybermask, knowing that it'll then take one more order to kill. Oh, we do get one more thing done this turn. And that's that with like a couple of spare orders before the Dokkaebai goes into Cybermask, the Moang and Sujan, who are hanging out sort of like up in this space here, the Sujan nestles down behind the boat, the Moang moves around and then back to get line of sight to the GoPod and aces it, puts it all the way to unconscious. And that's just not hugely surprising. We mentioned before that the GoPod was just too far forward. The aerial vehicles are very, very fragile. Yes, they have 2 wounds. Yes, they have, in this case, Mimetism 3, Ballistic Skill Attack -3, but they cannot claim cover. They will go down like just an absolute sack of shit the second something draws a bead on them, if they are caught in reactive turn without something like Suppressive Firearm. They're very fast. Their huge advantage is their mobility. They have to be used as an active turn piece. They can't really defend, and we're learning that as we play. So that GoPod kill took enough orders to force the Dokkaebai to just have to Cybermask up prone on the boat surface, which is going to get the Dokkaebai killed, but I think overall worthwhile because it shaves off one more of those pieces that could really be a threat moving in at me toward my deployment zone, etc. So Aaron kicks into his second turn with like some orders down, consolidates his forces a little bit, but mostly in a solid position, and in effect, he can just do a lot of what he did in the first turn again in the second. Because he's reloaded the Hollow Man pitcher, he can throw out pitches again, and that is really, really annoying, and just sort of like take all of that, take advantage of all of that info war capability. Now, there's going to be a slight misplay here, mostly in terms of overextension, which again we will identify only in retrospect once all the dust has settled, but is something that this is one of the things where, as you learn the game, you learn when these things are happening. You have to make these mistakes usually once or twice before you do, and that is going to be an overextension of the Hollow Man team. They'll be asked to do just slightly too much. So what they will accomplish is they're going to be moving forward, Perseus is going to use that very reliable smoke. He's actually going to whiff a couple of times before eventually landing it, which is egregiously bad dice. But he's going to get smoke down to block line of sight with the Moang and the Yanhuo. They'll end up sort of like there and there. He'll move up and around and just absolutely discover and then annihilate, because he's got discover bonuses thanks to the 3-person link, discover and annihilate the Dokkaebi. The Dokkaebi will actually take one more order than he would expect to kill, and that's the BTS 6 going only down to 3. Actually saves its ass from the first volley, which means that in total, the orders that Perseus and team have taken, he's taken like 2 more orders than he expected to do all of the things that he needed, and that's going to materially matter, because Aaron had this plan, going to do this, going to do this, going to do this, and it takes 1 more order to throw smoke than needed and then expected, and 1 more order to kill the cyber combat team. And that means that as the rest of the plan comes together, there aren't quite enough orders left to properly retreat. So the Hollow Man team continues to move out and around this way, through the smoke, press this button, reveal this HVT, Perseus comes out and around and shoots and kills the HVT, but then Aaron only has 1 order left, and realistically he needed 1 or 2 orders to pull the team back properly to safety. And so what it means is that the team, the entire, this important Hollow Man team, which represents a lot of the remainder of his strength, and an engineer that moved forward to sort of help them out, is caught kind of in the open. Now, the engineer has done a bunch of annoying things. The engineer has placed 2 turrets over the course of this turn. They're up in high places. One of them is, actually, this was placed last turn. We can see a turret on this building here. Another turret is going to go up on top of this crate, in the middle of my deployment zone, which I will then have to deal with. And these are very annoying things, but Aaron not pulling the Hollow Man team back, just 1 more order, don't go after the HVT, deal with it next turn. 1 more order pulling the entire team back 12 more inches to safer positions would have left him in a much, much better position. Because, as it is, I'm able to basically spool up and do Yanhuo and Moang things, etc. Now, I am going to have to deal with a ton of deployable equipment that's very, very annoying. The Moang will do a fair bit of that work. The Moang will move out and around. It will actually take a bunch of shots against the turret from this rooftop, kill it, and then jump down and then move around here and take long plunging shots up the alleyway that will, I think, put down another Hollow Man and the Clockmaker, and then it will eventually get up onto this building here, hanging out sort of on this ladder behind that little bit of cover, and it will deal with more. It will just shoot, move, shoot, shoot. Great use of the orders in that combat group. Just big, powerful fire support options. I love the Yanhuo. It's probably one of my favorite models in the game, and it's one of my favorite profiles as well. This then lets the Moang and Sujan move forward. The Moang kind of has to take one for the team here, because Aaron has once again put a repeater down in this very annoying position. So the Moang just has to move forward, gat it with a pistol, put it down, and then he gets bricked to absolute hell. I think he gets isolated and immobilized by AROs. That's fine. The Sujan is carrying a switch on for exactly this purpose, so the Sujan then moves up and switches him back on so that he's able to move forward and continue to do things, and I think he's the one that will eventually destroy this turret. Now, destroying the turret that is sort of watching Aaron's midfield, we do see the limitations of a Red Fury here. Turrets from memory are armor 2, this one is claiming cover, and so even though I hit it a bunch with the Red Fury, because it's hitting me back on 1s, it just passes its saves, then it passes its saves, then it passes its saves. I think it takes me 3 orders to put the turret down, but I have to put the turret down. I have to deal with it. I do have some visibility control left in the list, but it's just better to deal with that material now than try and deal with it on my final turn. Now, over the course of this turn, I am not able to press any further buttons. I am not really able to accomplish any more. This is mostly an annihilation turn, and I have to spend a lot of time destroying material. Aaron's able to build quite a good defense, which then I have to clear through, and that takes orders. And he sort of observed that he felt like he was in quite a lot of control over the tempo of the game for much of the game. And I kind of agree. And I think that if he hadn't overextended the Hollow Man team into the midfield, he had just, once he'd recognized that he didn't have quite enough orders left, he had left this HVT alive to deal with in a subsequent turn. I think there's a solid chance that would have been enough for him to win the game. At this point here, that would have been decisive. As it was, I'm able to get some fairly solid damage into him, and particularly with the crippling of, I think, the entire Hollow Man team, or almost the entire Hollow Man team, except for Perseus, and maybe 1 Hollow Man. So we've got Perseus, it's just a duo at that point. I think it's the Hacker and Perseus stay alive. The death of the Machinist, the death of the Hollow Man Pitcher, the destruction of the turrets, etc. It's not that much damage, but I am accruing an attritional lead. So we head into Aaron's final turn at top of 3 here, And he's only got so much left that can really make a difference to the game. And this is where we're sort of seeing, firstly, the loss of the Machinist is terrible. It should not have overextended. If it was in position to recover Hollow Man, this game would be much more difficult for me. It's kind of representative. This is kind of a difficult matchup. Once you commit to something like a Sujan Moang duo, playing into Tunguska is pretty difficult. And if we'd seen the full strength of the Tunguska list materialize, I'd be in a worse position than I am now. As it is, though, the position that Aaron finds himself in on turn 3 is kind of a product of decisions that I made in deployment and he made in deployment. He has built his fort kickass in the bottom left corner of the table. I have built my fort kickass in the top right corner of the table, intentionally as far away as possible from a bunch of the pieces that he has that might project some strength. And that means that with the Hollow Man team shut up, the Go Pod shut up, a lot of things basically down, the pieces that Aaron has left are all kind of in this bottom left quadrant of the table. And so he doesn't have a ton left that he can really do to really reliably, for example, go after the third HVT. I've moved up this Gudon troop, but not yet revealed it, and so Perseus is going to try and throw some smoke, and he's going to get zapped for his troubles. I think he will pass both of the BTS saves the first time, but also miss all of the smoke shots again. But then he will land all the smoke shots the second order, but get isolated. So that leaves Perseus isolated here in the midfield. At that point, that's fine. That's my problem to deal with. Aaron gets the smoke down and is able to start moving some things around because I've got a lot of guns watching. Right, I've got the Moang standing proud here, looking out over all of the rooftops. The Yan Ho has moved up as well. Aaron needs to get either smoke or marker state, and smoke is much more reliable because I have layered arrows. And so most of the rest of Aaron's turn is just trying to present a situation where it is difficult for me to subsequently win the game. The Interventor is going to move up and lay some fast pandas, keeping the Heckler for the moment concealed in the camouflage. I would probably have been better to activate the Heckler and just give himself more orders, because what he attempts to do here is lay out a fast panda, and then attempt to isolate the Moang just so it's not a threat in my active turn. And the Moang's got good BTS, and it passes some rolls, and then it passes wins a willpower roll, and it survives 2 orders attempting to be isolated from Aaron's Interventor. And if he had just revealed the Heckler, he would have had a couple more orders to do that with. He might not have had to have used Perseus. So, small inefficiency there that might have changed the game. And it's going to matter because I'm going to make a play on my final turn that will that will need every order that I have. So, sort of not much going on in Aaron's final turn, but he's got 2 buttons pressed. He's got 2 HVTs killed, which means he's nominally in the scenario lead. And as an observation, after my last game and battle report with Norkaias, which was very much decisively resolved on the first turn, it's really nice to play a game of Infinity in N5 that kind of goes back to that trend of actually the scenario tends to be pretty live all the way through to the end of the game. That's really good. I liked that. I enjoyed the spectacle of the Norkaias game, but I am grateful that this game is not like the Norkaias game. Now, as I roll into my third turn, there's kind of a pretty clear and obvious play that I should be making, and in a tournament I would make this play. I don't have a lot of specialists left, but I do have some. I should press this central button and then kill this HVT. That equalizes the number of HVTs killed. Both players will have not... I mean, if it turns out that's the real one, I just win the game on the spot. If it turns out it's not the real one, which is my assumption, then I still am going to win the game on the tiebreak of the person who has the most consoles pressed. And so in a tournament, that's how I would do that. However, this is a Sujan battle report, and so far, all the Sujan has done is turn the Moang back on after it got turned off. And so I go into the tank for a couple of minutes and produce a plan that will enable me to do things with the Sujan in order to meet the brief of playing a Yujing list with Sujan in a battle report. And so this is how the turn plays out. The first thing is that the Combat Group 2 Daoying operative control device is going to spend all the lieutenant orders, etc. He's going to move out and around this way, up to here, and with I think 1 order to spare, presses this button. So central button is flipped to me. Cool. I reveal the HVT along the bottom table edge. Yes, Aaron confirms that is real. We now have to kill it. This is where the Sujan comes in. With every order in that group, noting that there have been repeaters seeded everywhere again, the Sujan is going to move down through this alleyway, around here and up over a ladder, across this bridge where it will be ARO'd against and get shot several times, down this ladder, up and around here, and on the last order of the turn, round the corner, in combat form, burst 3 shotgun into the HVT. The HVT attempts to roll a dodge, and it rolls a 10. And we go and check its stats. Does the HVT have Fizz 10 or 11? I'm pretty sure it's 11, but let's just check if that's a crit. It's not a crit, Fizz 11, but it is a very good roll. I fire my Burst 3 shotgun and roll something like a 1, a 20, and a 12. So one shotgun hit gets through. Damage on a heavy shotgun is, I want to say, 5. HVT attempts to roll its save. It's not in cover because of how far around I've gotten. It fails its save and it dies, or goes unconscious, on the last order of the game. That means I've killed the real HVT, which is a whole bunch of points, and a bunch of points that Aaron doesn't get, and etc. So that flips the score to a significant win for Vanilla Yuching with the very last order of the game. And of course, the caveat that in an event, the correct play would just have been to go on for the decoy in the midfield, because that just cleanly secures still a 6-point win because neither of us have had our HVTs killed. This was not the correct play, but it was the Sujan play. So thank you again to channel supporter Ape of Justice for making the request. In this final turn, in this 11th hour, we got to see the Sujan circumnavigate literally the entire table to reach and annihilate its target. The only kill that it would get all game, but a kill that is worth a great deal of scenario points. So that kind of concludes this battle report. I would definitely say that I think that if Aaron's list, he had like a couple more reps with it, he wasn't he's a returning player, he's got great fundamentals. Like Aaron is a very, very good wargamer. But this is the kind of thing, you make these little, like, you don't fully realize some of the plays that you can potentially make, you don't fully realize some of the synergies that exist in your list. I think if even one or two of those had been like a bit more thoroughly realized, I think this would have been a really, really challenging game to win. That's kind of just the nature of the matchup. If you're running heavy infantry Yuching into a faction like Tunguska, you're only, particularly having made as many compromises as I have, like there's no engineer in this list, for example. I have one use of switch on in order to get through the hacking network, and that's basically it. These are compromises that I made in my list, which really come home to roost if you're playing against a faction like Tunguska. So even though the final score in the end was decisive, I think Aaron's list is very good. And I think, if we played this game 3 or 4 or 5 times and he had a chance to really refine how to maximize the strengths of his list, I think by the end of that, this matchup would be probably like 60-40 Tunguska favored, like a pretty significant amount of the time. As it was, though, we got to see the Moang do Moang things, the Yanhuo do Yanhuo things, the Sujan do Sujan things, which makes it a good time in my book. I liked my list overall. It's just not necessarily an ideal scenario or matchup for the Sujan, even though the Sujan would eventually get to just make an absolute cross-country trek to go and kill a single civilian. And so that concludes this battle report. As always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed it. As a reminder, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. Big thanks to everyone who has so far. I have it set to like the lowest possible cost. It's like pennies on the dollar, but it marks you as a channel supporter, and I take battle report requests, topics, etc. from channel supporters if you have something that you'd like to request. In terms of future content, more battle reports. I'm also working on an N5 1 month in kind of impressions take, which we may or may not end up recording. And I do want to do particularly a Shinden Butai faction focus as probably the first faction focus of N5, but I need a little bit of time to cook on that. I'm getting there in terms of developing an opinion, but I want it to actually be an opinion rather than just a hot take video. So keep an eye out for those videos in future. As before, we're trying to continue to hit 1 video per week, so check back in next weekend for another piece of Infinity content. As always, thanks very much to the channel supporters who allow me to do these kind of things. I hope very much you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.